The Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally. Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network. Available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. Hey, how's everyone doing? Thanks for joining me. Today, we want to talk about ideas. You may have heard me have a fun conversation with Leslie M. And I said, I always present my ideas as crappy ideas. Everything is a crappy idea. I'm trying to take the pressure off myself, right? But what she said is, you shouldn't judge your idea at all, period. An idea is an idea. Stop judging it. But at some point, we have to move ideas forward or build on them or combine them or whatever, right? Because that's where innovation starts, at least in my opinion. We will see. Maybe today's guest will disagree. Maybe he'll agree with me. But we want to talk about how do you validate ideas? How do you move them forward? And when it comes to content creation, my friends, you have to publish. You have to publish. It is a fact of life. If you don't publish your podcasts, your articles, whatever, it's never going to perform, period. Same is true for anything else in marketing. So today I'm joined by Will Russell, founder and CEO of Russell Marketing. Will, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Christoph. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So talk to me about ideas. What's your opinion on what I just talked about? Should we even talk about crappy ideas or good ideas, or how do we move ideation forward without making anyone feel bad?
Well, you brought up a couple of good points in that starting piece. First thing, you talked about whether an idea is a good idea or a bad idea. I would say if I've learned anything in the years I've been launching products, events, apps, I've learned that my gut feeling can often be way off. So I like to be very objective, and I don't tend to have many feelings about ideas until we put them out there and validate them, and then and let the data do the talking. And then your point number two of got to publish. I think that resonates well with not just publishing, but anything we can talk about today, any sort of idea. You know, you're not going to find out whether it's a good idea or a bad idea until you put it out into the world and let the people who you want to enjoy it share their feedback on it and respond. And so mostly I agree with what you just said with a couple of additional bits and pieces.
That's always what I like to hear. Now, one thing is, to get feedback from people, we'll throw it up here. VoxPopMe.com, Agile Qualitative Research with video. You can directly ask your consumers, your customers, what are they thinking about an idea? What, is it working for them? And kind of move it forward from there. And I'm actually a big fan of the design thinking process too, right? I mean, you get feedback as you move along, and you keep iterating as you move forward. Well, what other tips can you share when it comes to coming up with good ideas and then moving them forward? What's the silver bullet, so to speak?
I think the silver bullet has to be get that market validation, whether it's through the design thinking process, whether it's through focus groups, whether it's through online tools where you can speak directly to customers, or whether it's through your own validation funnels. Number one is to take that idea from the back of a napkin or from your mind, wherever it's sitting, and get some real data, get some real information on it before you go too far. I think one of the challenges I see, or one of the mistakes I see by many entrepreneurs in my business, is they invest a lot time, money, energy, emotion in their idea prior to collecting that feedback. And so one thing I always push for is you don't need a lot of money, you don't need a lot of time in order to just test that idea in the market. But But you can do it very quickly, very affordably, and then coming out of that test, whether it's an online ads test, whether it's a focus group, whatever it might be, you actually have real data, and what that leads to is confidence. So once we've done a validation, we've validated this idea, we've seen the market loves it, responds really well. Maybe there's a couple of bits and pieces of nice feedback they have on audiences or messaging or whatnot. But primarily we're looking for that confidence. And then the entrepreneur can feel much more comfortable investing more time, investing more money, and investing, frankly, kind of more emotion, more fit to the project, knowing that it has a higher likelihood of success, and knowing that once they do all that work, the market's likely to respond in a pretty positive way. And then just on the reverse end, not all product ideas, not all ideas in general are good ones, and that's okay as well. But what we want to do is we want to find that out as quickly as possible. And so validating the idea, doing the market research allows you to find out very, very quickly before you invest a lot of money, a lot of time, find out very quickly whether the consumer, the customer, the audience is going to respond in a good way. And if they're not going to respond, if it's just not a product people want, then better to know that now, before you spent a year building a prototype or a year writing the book. Find that out now, deal with it, put it away, either iterate on it perhaps, or just move on to a new idea. Better to find out that it's a no-go as quickly as possible and affordably as possible.
Well, so the one thing as a content person that I always struggle with is the amount of effort I put into something does not equal the amount of success it has, right? So, I mean, I've done podcasts on my phone, right? Me just talking into my phone and publishing them. I had like 43,000 views, and it took me no time. There was no editing, right? And sold books and whatever. So how do we figure out what is the right amount of time? So, for example, when it comes to content strategy, like I know it's going to take me a while, right? Like when I try something new, whether it's podcasting, live streaming, whatever, I know I can't just go 7 episodes, which, by the way, is what a lot of people are doing. They publish 7 episodes and then they go, podcasting doesn't work. And I'm like, podcasting totally works, but you only did 7 episodes. And then they'll say, well, but we're just testing. I'm like, well, you can test, but it takes you longer than 7 episodes. So how do you know I find that really hard to figure out what's the amount of time, or how do you tie it all together, right? I mean, think about what we're doing. We have the live stream. The live stream goes to TV. That goes to the radio network. That goes to the podcast. I might write an article about it. If one of those pieces doesn't perform, I don't even care. Do you know what I mean? Because it's all tied together. And I just, it's the same amount of work almost. So how do people figure that out? What's the right amount of time to invest?
Well, I will point to what you said at the end there. Firstly, you spread your bets, right? I think that's number one, is important for people to remember. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try different things, try different channels, try different platforms, because throwing all of your time in one area, if it doesn't work out, you're going to be in trouble. So I think that's just a note. With regards to how you know, I would say a couple of things. The first thing would be any sort of validation of an idea is just a minuscule campaign, essentially. It's a minuscule version of what you want to achieve. So building out a podcast, a successful podcast, and longevity is obviously a lot of hard work and a lot of time. Building a successful product, obviously a lot of hard work and a lot of time. So what we want to do is just take the smallest possible version of that and put it in the market, put it out there and see what the response is. So for a product, oftentimes we're launching products. We're looking at perhaps running a very, very simple advertising funnel, for example, or focus group with simply concepts. We're not even promoting a product, just the concept. So the work that's been done, the investment that's been done is simply kind of formulating and making a little bit clearer what this idea is, who the audience is, what the messaging is. And then we put it out there. So no one can buy it yet. No one can really do anything with it yet. We just want to see how the market's going to respond through surveys, through advertising data, through web data, kind of time on site might be a relevant metric for certain content pieces, downloads, that kind of stuff. Now, once you've done that test, I think the second thing to make sure you have going into it is some clear understanding of the benchmarks you want to assess it against. So let's say we put a product idea out there and we get 100 people express interest. Then we need to understand, well, what is that 100 a good number or a bad number? And so we have to have a benchmark to benchmark that against. So if you're doing this on your own, there's a lot of good information out there online where you can research industry benchmarks for a lot of different things. Or if you're working with a company that can help deliver validations around ideas, they're going to have a whole bunch of benchmarks that they can point it against. But ultimately, if you're going to run that little test, you're going to have some sort of metric, some sort of understanding by which you're going to assess the early data you collect. And I think that's very important. So in the case of those podcasters you spoke about, Christoph, the 7 episodes, I would argue, did they have a sufficient metric and a sufficient understanding of what they were going to benchmark against? What were their expectations in those 7 episodes? Because of course, if they were expecting 1 million views, then obviously they were going to be disappointed. But putting context to that particular offer, that particular idea, and putting benchmarks to it so that they can actually see whether what they delivered and the data they collected and the response they got surpassed or kind of underperformed, I think is super important as well. So we look at coming up with a really, really light that version of the idea, and then secondly, making sure that we have accurate benchmarks by which we can assess the performance of that early test.
I think that sounds that sounds correct, but I think it's a lot harder than it sounds. And I think we have to listen to people, right? I mean, the example, so I produce Real Talk, the Customer Insights show, and Nick Graham was on that show earlier this week. And he said, that quote everybody talks about, how you shouldn't talk to customers, and they say, Henry Ford said, well, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And he said that's total baloney, that people use that as an example, that you shouldn't talk to customers. There is totally an insight in that quote. They're not telling you they want a car because they don't know what a car is, but they're certainly telling you that they want to go faster, right? So I think the listening and asking people the right question, I think that's a whole challenge in its own, right? What are you asking people? I mean, if I'm thinking about the whole Apple product system or ecosystem today, 15 years ago, had you said to me that I need all this stuff, do I need a watch? Do I need an iPhone? Do I need an iPad Pro? I would have been like, no, why? And now it's like, I use it for everything. Please tell me where my kid is. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you talk to your watch. So how do you kind of figure that out? How do you find the right balance between presenting something or trying something and then asking the right questions and then not just listening, but really hearing what people say? And, this whole, when I heard the thing about Henry Ford, I've heard that example a million times. I'm serious. Everybody says, everybody says that. And then when Nick kind of turned it around, I'm thinking, that is so true. They totally told you they need to go they want to go faster, but they don't know how to do it. But nobody apparently hears it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I think are really neat ways of coming to that and really hearing what people are saying. The first thing is running your own surveys, and I'll point out, make sure if you're doing focus groups, if you're asking people about your idea, they've got to be strangers. There's a great book, I can't remember the author, called The Mum Test, which talks about you can't, mum, is my idea good? Of course your mum's going to think your idea is good. So making sure when you're collecting this feedback from potential customers, you're doing it in a way where you're asking people who will give you honesty. There's nowhere you'll get more honesty, kind of anonymous social media channels, and it can be brutal in terms of providing feedback, but sometimes that brutal feedback is necessary. And then for people who say, well, I don't know how to ask for focus groups, or I don't have funnels set up to run surveys, I would say go to Amazon, go to eBay, go and look at review websites and try and find solutions that are similar to yours. So that I didn't say products, if you know, because there's not always a directly comparable product. I have a launch marketing agency, so I can't go onto Amazon and try and find different launch marketing agencies that wouldn't be there. However, I could find books about marketing, and I can look into those kind of reviews, and that's where people are often giving honest opinions. And so what we like to do for clients oftentimes is go through review sites and start pulling out the common threads. So if we see a lot of commentary around how a product is too expensive, or not durable enough, or not waterproof enough, or whatever the case may be, a book's too long, a book's too short, a book's not got enough detail, granularity, we can compile all of those individual reviews, maybe look at 50, 60 reviews, and you can find some common trends. You can find that, hey, 12 different people were talking about how this book was too long and could have been shorter and really focused, or 15 people were talking about how my water bottle was leaking, or this water bottle was leaking. And so you can put each of those kind of groups of reviews around the same topic into kind of categories. And just from a couple of hours of research on Amazon, it's pretty easy to pull out maybe half a dozen or so key categories of feedback that you can see customers talking about with other similar products, or other products that solve a similar problem to the one you're trying to solve. And you can put them into practice with your own product launches, your own idea launches. So you don't even have to have your own funnel set up. You don't have to have your own marketing set up or your own focus groups to start collecting this information, because the internet's full of it just by browsing review sites. So as you point out, Crystal, super important, and I think readily available for anyone right away to start digging into.
You know, I think what you kind of hint on a little bit here too is stop making excuses why you can't do it, right? There's always a way. Like, you might not buy some high-end solution to do focus groups in 6 metro areas in the United States. Do you know what I mean? If you're a startup, for example, but you might go on, you might go check reviews. You might go on those different channels. You might listen to people. Now, on social media, though, it's interesting because sometimes I would caution people, you still want to kind of really hear people and think about what you're hearing, because sometimes the different extremes are the loudest. I remember, what's his name? The 49ers quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, when he had the Nike commercial, and everybody on social media was like totally on Nike, saying why, they shouldn't do this, whatever. There was no positivity, but the search for Nike went way up, sales went way up, so it worked, right? So my point is, I agree. You just want to make sure, think about other sources too. What other sources can you listen to? What other sources can you research and whatnot? And of course, asking people to, and the internet can be brutally honest. That's for sure. Now, but how about how people feel? I mean, I know there's some companies, you bring up ideas, they're just shut down. There's actually this Instagram account, I don't remember her name. It's not Corporate Natalie. It's I don't remember her name, but she said the worst thing is when this says your idea is trash, the long pause after you mention it, right? How do you get people? How do you get teams to be collaborative and value ideas and move them forward, or combine them, or whatever? How do we get people on the same page?
Well, for me, you're pointing out kind of the the common negativity or common negative aspect of working in more corporate work environments, bigger work environments where there's more decision makers. We feel that when we work with startups who are just very small teams, decisions and ideas, there's never a bad idea. Things can move through pretty quickly. You test things, you validate things, and they trust the data. In my experience, the bigger the company, generally, the more decision makers and the less people start to look at the data and trust the data, and the more people want to voice their opinion. And I guess that's partly a human nature where people want to be heard. And if there's a team of 8, 10, 12 people and one person has an idea, then another person obviously wants to stand out as well and make their own progress in their career and in life. So I guess in that standpoint, when you're looking at internal decision making, internal ideation, and getting those ideas tested, it's all about thinking of people rather than necessarily just thinking about the idea and the customer. But in this case, in this situation, you're not just selling your idea potentially to the future customer, but you're going to be selling, even testing the idea to the team around you and understanding how can you bring people in and ensure that everyone receives recognition, perhaps if that's what they're looking for, or how can you make people's lives easier? Or I guess one of the common themes in internal discussions in bigger companies about new ideas or doing something a little bit different is going to be, well, this is just going to add workload to my plate. So you want to avoid that. That's a big stumbling block. So really there's a great book, another one I think of called To Sell is Human by Dan Pink, which talks about how everything we do every day is pretty much selling. And the traditional salesman or woman is no longer in the past, but everyone plays that role now. And how, whether it's selling a product to a customer as a startup or selling an idea within a company to your team, we're all trying to sell. And what we just need to do is understand and empathize with whoever we're trying to sell to. So in the case of a work environment, maybe people, they don't want to take on the extra work. They've got something, they want to go to their kids' soccer game at the weekend. So if you need to move that idea forward, you need to make sure you're addressing that objection.
And you also got to figure out what are people motivated by, right? I think
Exactly.
The whole getting recognition for every idea, I don't know if that's actually possible, right? Because if you're truly in a team environment, what happens is, somebody says one thing, and then before you know it, somebody else builds on that. So can you really tell who has had each idea along the way? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recognize that. But as you point to, maybe we touch on the recognition being an important piece of it. But as you said, it's going to be different for everybody. There's going to be different obstacles. A lack of recognition may be one obstacle. The inability or not wanting to do a bit of extra work, or not wanting, or having a busy workload and not wanting to take anything off your plate to replace it. Whatever the case may be, understanding, as you point out, and empathizing with what is someone's need, what does someone want, and how can you help them get that. That's applicable to your internal team. That's applicable between me and you today in this conversation. That's applicable to startups with their ideas, selling to new customers. That's applicable to bloggers or content creators publishing new content. It's something that everyone can think through themselves.
And that, is that also the definition of what a good idea that should be moved forward is anyways? How does it help whoever you're trying to reach? How does it help your customer, your audience? Is that how we should measure it, or how would you recommend that?
Well, I do think that's a big part of it. Obviously, any successful product is going to be solving a problem people have. However, I do think there's a difference between having an idea, a good idea that can solve people's problems, and turning that into a viable business idea or viable or a successful idea, depending on however you're measuring that success. We can have a great solution and people appreciate it, but if you can't create that solution in an affordable way, in a timely way, in a way that's actually going to make it materialize kind of at a price point, at a cost that the end consumer will accept, then it's still not going to work. So I do think there's a couple of things there. Number one, obviously, all good ideas have to be ideas that solve problems, that help people, provide value. And then the second question is, can we make this idea work in the channels available to us? So if it's a product, e-commerce, for example, can you make it work with an e-commerce system? If it's a book, can you make it work in terms of getting a publisher to purchase a manuscript? I think there's a second step, which is less theoretical and more practical, based on kind of the available resources to us.
Absolutely. Will, in the last minute here or so, tell us, how do people work with you? How do they reach you? And who do you work with?
Sure. So we're Russell Marketing. You can visit the website russellmarketing.co. We have a launch system. We launch products, apps, events. We work a lot with hardware products, people looking to launch on crowdfunding or hardware, that kind of thing. If you have an idea, that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to take that idea, validate it, and launch it with a successful campaign. So feel free to head over to russellmarketing.co. Just take a look at some of our projects, and should you have something you think we can collaborate on, then of course you can contact us right there.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully everybody gets some ideas on how to think about your ideas, bringing them to market, validating them, and collaborating together. Will, really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time, let the best stories win.